Krishna. Welcome back to our study of the Yoga Sutras. Today we are going to discuss Sutra number 18 from the Samadhi Pada, which is perhaps the most debatable sutra among scholars of the Yoga Sutras. Right? So let us see what this sutra is. This is how the sutra goes. Virama pratyaya abhyasa purva samskara sheshonyah. What does this sutra say? Virama. Virama here means like a break, an interruption, a pause. Right? In what? Virama, of an interruption in the pratyaya abhyasa. If you remember, when we discussed the previous sutra, sutra number 17, we spoke about these 4 stages of vitarka, vichara, ananda, and asmita. Reasoning, reflection, bliss, and a sense of I-ness, identity. The object of meditation, there we spoke about the rose, right? That rose was changing from its physical to conceptual to experiential to the sense of identity. The pratyaya was undergoing a modification. So that practice which was spoken about, purvaha here means in the previous sutra, when there is a pause in that, in that flow of the progression that we spoke about in the previous sutra, there comes another samadhi. Anyaha means different, other. And what is the characteristic of this? It is samskara shesha. At this stage, there are still some samskaras remaining or subliminal imprints remaining. Now, let's see the translation here. In the pause or the interruption arising between the practice based on the refinement of the pratyaya arises another samadhi where samskaras still remain. Now, what do we mean by samskaras? See, everything that we do, every time I think something, I do something, I see something, right? Anytime I'm using the chitta, there is an imprint left on the chitta, and this is what is called as the samskaras. This is a topic that is going to come back later in the 2nd chapter of this book. But at this point, right, think of these samskaras as like impressions. And these impressions, they create our inclinations. Right? This is a theme which is very important as sadhakas, as seekers. If you want to really understand how the chitta is working, the concept of samskaras and vasanas or inclinations is important. And Patanjali is going to repeat later on in the 2nd chapter of this book. But at this point, it is important for us to just remember samskaras means those imprints. At this stage, there are still some imprints remaining, right? So what exactly is Patanjali talking about? See, in this progression that we spoke about in the previous sutra from vitarka, vichara, anand, asmita, in the gaps in between these stages, right, in the pause, there is another samadhi, anyaha. Patanjali doesn't exactly give a name for this kind of samadhi. He just calls it is the other type of samadhi, right? Now, here is where the challenge comes. What do we call this samadhi? Because we cannot just keep calling it the other samadhi, the other samadhi. We want to give it some name. And from the popular lingo, the term that is given to this kind of samadhi is asampragyata samadhi. Remember, in the previous sutra, we learned the term sampragyata samadhi. Sampragyata means, remember, conscious, deliberate effort is being put. Right? Now, because this is the other type, naturally, the term that represents opposite to sampragyata is asampragyata. In Sanskritam language, when you want to create an opposite, you add the prefix a in most cases. Like, for example, if there is shanti, shanti means peace. Then the opposite of shanti is ashanti. Or we heard the term chit. Chit means eternal. The opposite of that chit or temporary becomes achit, right? So likewise, if sampragyata is category 1, the other, automatically the name becomes asampragyata. But by calling it asampragyata, we are running into some technical challenges, and that is the debate we will try to see now. Right? So let us now analyze the nature of the different samadhis that Patanjali talks about. At this point, we know about sampragyata samadhi, the conscious or deliberate samadhi. Later on in the book, Patanjali is going to use a term called as sabija samadhi. Bija means a seed, because there is the seed of an object of meditation, a pratyaya, like the rose in our previous example, because you're still holding on to a support in your mental notions. It is still called Sabija Samadhi. And what is the nature of this Sabija or Sampragyata Samadhi? It is a conscious effort, right? And there are still some samskaras remaining. If you remember in our previous session, we spoke about how even at that stage of Asmita, I am, there are some slight traces, at least the sattvic traces of chitta still remaining. So there are still some samskaras remaining, right? Now, then there is the perfected stage of Samadhi, which Patanjali, in the end of this chapter, the last sutra, he's going to use a term called as Nirbija. Nirbija here means, at this stage, I'm not using any support. It is not a deliberate effort. This is such an advanced stage that the yogi very naturally goes into the state of Samadhi without even making an effort. Just like how right now, without making any effort, I have chitta vrittis. That is our conditioned state. So to be conditioned is very natural to us. Like that, to be unconditioned or to be very pure is very natural for such a very advanced yogi. And therefore, the nature is unconscious. It's a non-deliberate samadhi is what is nirbij samadhi. And at that stage, there are no samskaras remaining. This is the purest, the highest form of samadhi, which Patanjali will describe later on. Now, where do we fit in this text 18, Sutra 18 Samadhi? The other Samadhi, Anyaha, the other Samadhi, its nature is unconscious because I'm not using any pratyaya. There is a gap in the pratyaya, right? Technically, which means that there is no object of meditation being used. There is no pratyaya being used. So in that sense, it seems like it is unconscious. But Patanjali mentions there are still some samskaras remaining. And that is where the source of debate and confusion is. Just by looking at the nature column, it is right to call it as asampragyata samadhi, or it is an unconscious samadhi, as the name suggests, right? Sampragyata, conscious effort, asampragyata, very natural or unconscious samadhi. But if I look at it from the samskaras column, I still cannot call it as nirbija. Because nirbija samadhi is also asampragyata. It is an effortless samadhi, right? It is an unconscious, non-deliberate samadhi. So this anyaha, I cannot equate it with that highest stage of samadhi as nirbija samadhi, because nirbija samadhi, the purest samadhi, should be free from all samskaras, all latent imprints in the chitta. But in this stage, Patanjali is explicitly mentioning that there are still some samskaras remaining, right? So this, if we understand this difference, we can very conveniently, we can safely use the word asampragyata samadhi for what is being described in Sutra 18, right? Without confusing it with nirbija samadhi. So the conclusion we can draw from this is that the so-called other samadhi is also unconscious, like the non-deliberate samadhi, like the nirbija samadhi, but you cannot call it as the highest stage of nirbija samadhi because there are still some samskaras remaining. So with this understanding, we can now safely call it as asampragyata samadhi. We will just give a name to it, right? Now, this samadhi becomes a very interesting concept. If you look at it, the yogi at this stage still has some samskaras, some impressions are still there, but yet they are very advanced, right? So how can such a person remove even those remainder of the samskaras? What exactly happens to such a yogi? So usually what happens, why at all such a scenario comes, see, the process of attaining samadhi is not like, I sit down in 1 hour and I perfect it. It sometimes is a lifetime's effort. Such people are extremely, extremely rare. Now, in the course of their practice of advanced yoga, sometimes even before they accomplish the ultimate goal, they may run out of their duration of life. However, when such people are reborn, they are still born with an advanced state of consciousness. Because they are reborn, birth itself happens because of the samskaras. They still have some samskaras, and yet they are very advanced. They seem like they're very unconsciously, naturally going to state of samadhi. So describing such people as a continuation to Sutra 18, the next sutra, Patanjali describes what happens to such people, such asampragyata samadhi people, who have still not perfected, right? But they cannot be seen, they cannot be considered as ordinary souls, right? Regarding them, he describes in Sutra 18, Bhava pratyayo videha prakrutilayanam. Such people, bhava pratyaya, they don't have any pratyaya, right? They don't have any mental object, a notion that they are meditating on. So bhava pratyaya, meaning they absorb, they take shelter of bhava. Bhava here means material world, birth in this world. So they take shelter of birth, or in other words, they are reborn. They are reborn as what? As, very interesting, these two categories. One is called as videhas, and second is called as prakriti layas. right? So deha means body, right? Videhas means disembodied, those who do not have the so-called gross body, physical body as we have, as we human beings on earthly planet have, right? So this is how the translation goes. Such, now this is the part two which I added to give a continuity to the previous sutra. Such asampragyata samadhi achievers are reborn either as videhas, disembodied, or those who are very absorbed, they are merged into prakriti. What are these two categories? What are videhas? Now videhas, now the Vedic understanding is the universe is not a unidimensional universe, but it's a multidimensional universe. In fact, specifically the Vedic cosmology talks about 14 different planetary systems. What defines, what separates these planetary systems is not the physical distance, it's not the physical space, but rather it is the state of consciousness. There are certain higher planetary systems. In fact, the plane in which we live is called as Bhu-loka, or earthly plane. Beyond us, immediately above us, is what is called as Bhuvar-loka. And beyond that is what is called Swarga-loka, right? Bhuvar-loka is where some very advanced siddhas, yogic people, those who have mastered the spiritual consciousness, they live there. Beyond them lives the Swarga-loka, is where the cosmic administrators called as Devatas, they live. And so on, and it goes higher, Janaloka, Tapaloka, Maharloka, Satyaloka. There are different higher planetary systems. The people living in those planes are not exactly like us. In a sense, we have this physical body, gross body made of earth, water, fire, air, ether. As you keep going into higher planes, their grossness comes down, which means that, just immediately one layer above us, air and ether is one of their predominant elements. Like for us, how earth and water is one of our predominant elements, for them, air and ether becomes one of their predominant elements. As you keep going higher and higher, at one point, in the higher lokas, it is just intelligence and mind is what their form made of. Now, this is where I know many of you are going bonkers. It must be exploding in your head, like what exactly is this, right? But this is how higher dimensional planes are. So these are not exactly physical planes as we relate with, but these are subtle planes, right? And these are subtle dimensions. Such people living there are called as videhas. In a sense, they are disembodied, meaning that they do not have a gross body like ours. So such yogis, when they depart from this world in the middle of their practice, they are reborn in higher planetary systems as videhas. In the Bhagavad Gita also, Krishna talks about a similar concept. When Arjuna asks what happens to such an unsuccessful yogi, Krishna explains such yogis, they go to higher planetary system, they stay there, and they again come back and they are born in the family of Suchi or Srimat, in a very spiritually advanced, pious family, or in a very materially well-to-do family, so that they can resume their spiritual practice without much difficulty. Right? These are the videhas. And who are the Prakriti Layas? Now, this is another unique category. Prakriti Layas are those whose consciousness is merged into Prakriti, meaning that they may look externally very inert, very dumb. They are so inward, they are so turned inward that they just don't respond to outside world. They are so mentally, it's not that they are dumb, as for the very casual usage of the word. They are not dumb, but rather they are actually so spiritually elevated that they're just not interested in the worldliness. Like the Bhagavad Puran talks about the story of Jada Bharat. Jada itself means dumb, materially inert. So he was such an advanced soul in his previous life that when he was reborn, he was born with such an advanced state of consciousness that he's completely turned inward. He was completely aloof from the worldliness. He would not be interested in eating or any of the worldly enjoyments. He was completely absorbed. And such people may come across as being very dumb or retarded, but they are not so. But they are very advanced people, right? Yeah, sometimes such people, from their very young age, they start having some very high spiritual experiences. Their spiritual awareness is very high. They may not even explain what they are going through, but they go through very advanced levels of consciousness. Right? Some example, like in Maharashtra, we have Sant Gyaneshwar, or in southern part of India, we have sages like Ramana Maharshi, etc., who from their very childhood were experiencing advanced states of awareness. Right? These are the Prakriti Layas who are so absorbed into their inner states that they are aloof from external world. These are this is how these asampragyata samadhi seekers are reborn. Right? However, mind you, being born as a videha or a prakriti laya in itself is not the end of our journey. even such practitioners also need to come back on track and achieve the highest state of Samadhi. How to do that is going to be the subject of our next sutra. So stay tuned. The book is only going to get more and more exciting. I hope you join us and stay continued with this wonderful educational experience. So see you all very soon in the next session. Hare Krishna.